virtual classroom. We're happy to be together one more time in anticipation of declining good weather and in anxious mode of prayer for those people in the Bahamas and throughout the Caribbean and on the southern part of the United States. So let us go together in prayer. Grateful God, gracious God, we are grateful to you for this opportunity and grateful for your watchful eye over us and over all the earth. We ask your mercy in the case of the people in Bahamas and throughout that part of the world as they still rock and reel from your wind and your water. They all belong to you, and so do we, your servants. And so we thank you for your vigilant watch. We have read in your word that you never slumber and you never sleep. We thank you for that watch and pray that you would bless us with the blessings we need, that we would be able to see your kingdom and do your will in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I am interested. For the last, the time before last week, we talked about sacred secrets and how we're in the third part of what is called Third Isaiah, and I want us to begin tonight in chapter 57 to talk about some things that I want us to talk about. I want to begin like I often do with a question. When is worship hypocritical? Oh, Reggie had to go home. His wife is not well. And so he would have had these microphones all over the place by now. Thank you, sir. When is worship hypocritical? Say what?
She said that's a good question.
Well, thank you for your evaluation. How about the answer? You got a good answer for a good question?
When it's not sincere?
When it's not sincere? When what? When you're not practicing what you preach. Okay. What were you going to say, Sheila?
I was going to say similar to the same thing.
God had a problem with Judah because their worship had become hypocritical. They were inclined to worship God, but they were easily taken over by their own selfish interests and by their own personal appetites. They worshiped God and celebrated the feast days, and they even fasted. But after they were done, they went and did all kinds of things, including the worship of idols. And in tonight's, I think we'll likely get through 57 and 58 tonight, and maybe even 50, maybe all the way to 60, as we look at how this whole drama unfolds. Could I have chapter 57 beginning with verse 1? The righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. The devout are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Next verse. Those who walk uprightly enter into peace. They find rest as they lie in death. And I think I want just those two for now. Just those two. The it's true that, and Judah knows this very well, that God is protecting them from evil, and so they are taken away, and no one seems to understand that God is protecting them. You remember what that was about? You remember the exile when Jeremiah preached concerning their exile? He encouraged them to go into exile and join the Babylonians and to build and marry and have babies and learn crafts and maintain their skills and their knowledge and ability and prepare themselves for the day that they would be released. And so no doubt this, no one seems to care or wonder why. No one seems to understand that God is protecting them from the evil one. Sometimes God's way of preserving us. There's a fellow I know who said, had he not been arrested when he was arrested, gone to jail when he went to jail, he's certain that he would have died in the street because he was headed down a bad path. Yeah, but it turns out that it took having him locked up to get his attention and to spare him from all the kinds of behavior and the kinds of exposure that he had for himself when he was making his own decisions about doing what he wanted to do. And so the prophet here explains that God has a way of keeping us when we don't always understand that God is keeping us. Sometimes the closed door is like an unanswered prayer. If God gave me what I want when I want it, I might not be ready for it. It happened to Israel with their king. They wanted a king in their time. They wanted to have a king other than God. God was their king, but they wanted kings like all the other nations had. And so Bruce Lammers, who was my battalion commander when I was a young captain in Germany, said, if you want it bad, that's how you get it. And it's true. Sometimes it is. If you want it, it's bad grammar. If you want it badly, sometimes you get it bad. And they wanted it badly. They wanted a king badly, and he turned out to be a bad king. Started off all right, but he did not end well. But God had in mind for them another king in God's own time, and it came to pass that that king served them. So it's an important decision to make, to put your life, your present, and your future into God's hands, as opposed to taking control of yourself by yourself. It's the problem that these people had. They were more interested in their own choices and their own decisions and what pleased them personally than they were interested in pleasing God. And some people have called that hypocritical worship, because they say they are on the Lord's side, but when they get to choose sides, then they don't seem to be on the Lord's side. So they say one thing and do another thing. But the text says, but the people who follow God's paths will rest in peace when they die. And so that when we know what Paul writes on the subject, blessed are the dead, well, I guess it's not Paul, it's John, it's in the Revelation, who die in the Lord, may they rest from their labors. So we anticipate this time. Say that.
I just said, in their work we follow.
Yeah. She's done enough funerals to recite that language just like that. You don't hardly hear that any other time other than funeral time. I want to look at verses 3 through 13 together. one at back to back, please. But you come here, you children of a sorceress, you offspring of adulterers and prostitutes. Who are you? Who are you mocking? At whom do you sneer and stick out your tongue? Are you not a brood of rebels at the offspring of liars? You burn with lust among the oaks, and under every spreading tree you sacrifice your children in the ravines and under the overhanging crags. The idols among the smooth stones of the ravines are your portion. Indeed, they are your lot. Yes, to them you have poured out drink offerings and offered grain offerings. In view of all of this, should I relent? You have made your bed on a high and lofty hill. There you went up to offer your sacrifices. Behind your doors and your doorposts, you've put your pagan symbols. Forsaking me, you uncovered your bed. You climbed into it and opened it wide. You made a pact with those whose beds you love, and you looked with lust on their naked bodies. You went to Molech with olive oil and increased your perfumes. You sent your ambassadors far away. You descended to the very realm of the dead. You wearied yourself by such going about, but you would not say it is hopeless. You found renewal of your strength, and so you did not faint. Whom have you so dreaded and feared that you have not been true to me, and have neither remembered me nor forsaken nor taken this to heart? Is it not because I have long been silent that you do not fear me? I will expose your righteousness and your works, and they will not benefit you. When you cry out for help, let your collection of idols save you. The wind will carry all of them off. A mere breath will blow them away. But whoever takes refuge in me will inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. What is this about? You said it's about obedience to God. Yeah. What is the whole text about? This from verse 3. What is God's complaint? Yeah. And what about the nature of their idolatry? That's part of it. What else do you see? Yeah. He uses, say what else? Yeah, self-satisfaction. He uses all of these metaphors. They are sexual metaphors and sexual innuendo, and he describes the idolatry, idol worship, as prostitution and adultery, so that it's cheating on God. It's going out with another God instead of your own God. And so he uses these metaphors, and the language is so strong, it makes it easy to see how much God objects to their behavior. The New Living Translation says, "But you, come here, you witches' children, you offspring of adulterers and prostitutes, whom do you mock, making faces and sticking out your tongue?" This is how God receives this behavior. This is how God receives idolatrous behavior. He says, you make fun of me. Whom do you mock? Of course you mock God by making faces and sticking out your tongues, by ignoring what God has done and what God is doing, by ignoring what God offers and behaving behaving as though God didn't matter. You worship idols with great passion beneath the oaks and under every green tree. Here they are soiling themselves, as someone has said, hiding out in the dark, in the booth in the back, in the corner, with idol gods. That's their behavior with idols. Verse 5 says, "You sacrifice your own children." So they practiced human sacrifice. They abandoned their children by failing to teach their children to recognize, to observe the behaviors of their ancestors. It's unlikely that this is really about human sacrifice, but it is clearly about irresponsibility for your children. Children learn behavior from adults. So what we say is all right to say, and what we do is all right to do. And when we are not careful about what we say and what we do in front of children, it should not surprise us that they learn our behavior. So some of you have heard me say before, if you want your child to cuss around them. If you want your child to smoke around them. If you want whatever you want your children to do, if you behave that way in front of them, don't be surprised if they grow up to be just like you. Yeah, she said when we grew up, you couldn't do or say whatever you wanted to say. Most of us could not, but you and I are the same age, and you and I grew up in a time when for a minute, like in the 60s, we were interested in it's your thing. We were interested in giving kids opportunity to make their own choices, creating opportunities for them to decide for themselves as opposed to deciding for them. Not many of us our age did not require our children to go to church, but our parents required us to go to Sunday school and church. And so they saw to it that we were in the right places at the right times, doing the things that we needed to be doing. Not that our parents were perfect, but they tended to be much stricter than people your age and mine were when it comes to the children. Now Gladys is our age too, but Gladys was a strict mother. But Gladys was a preacher's child, and so Gladys grew up in a preacher's house, and so she learned how to bring up children, and she brought up hers just like she was brought up, and so it's not difficult to see her in her children some of the time. They ain't always like Gladys. They got a lot of Gladys in them, but they some of them could use more. Yeah, but when we neglect them, sometimes the first time children hear the word "no, you can't" is when they get to school and they run into a teacher who says "no, you can't." They're not accustomed to hearing "no, you can't," and so they rebel. They withstand their very own teachers and object to authority and have trouble submitting to the authority of adults or authority of other people, even the authority of institutions. They quit jobs because somebody made them mad, because and they walk off because they didn't like the way so and so said something to them, and this is learned behavior, and it's either from permissive parenting or from absent parenting. In either case, it's a sacrifice of the child. You give up your own child. You give your child to the world by not making corrections when corrections ought to be made, and by being so permissive that they don't have any idea about the connection between what you want, what they want, and how they can get it. And so they ask for everything and stomp and pout and cry when they don't get it, except in cases where they learn to have responsibilities around the house, chores, stuff to do. If you want that, you got to do this. And there's a yin and a yang. These things go together. But Judah had a behavior of abandoning their own children, sacrificing them, as it were, down in the valley among the jagged rocks in the cliffs. That's where, in many instances, the people, after their regular Sabbath worship, would go out and worship the idol gods. Your gods, verse 6, are the smooth stones in the valley. You worship them with liquid offerings and grain offerings. So they poured out oil on these stones. And in the story of Jacob at Bethel, the act of pouring out oil on the rock is an act of worship. But he poured out the oil and called it the house of God. In this case, the stones became the gods. The stones themselves were the objects of worship. You worship them with liquid offerings. You pour out liquid offerings and grain offerings for them. They, not I, are your inheritance. Yeah, you get what you make. If that's the God you want to serve, okay, go ahead and see what you get for that. And then in the New Living Translation says, the next part of verse 6 says, do you think all this makes me happy? Is God pleased? Do you expect me to be pleased with the fact that I have so much to give to you? And rather than accepting what I have to give to you, you go whoring after some false god who can't help you? Verse 7, you've committed adultery on every high mountain. Good God Almighty. There you have worshiped idols, and you've been unfaithful to me. So he regards the intimate relationship of the devoted and the devout as or the divine, the devoted and the divine as violating, as it were, the marriage bed. It's violating the relationship between a husband and wife, violating the relationship between the one true God and a false God. You worship them with liquid offerings. They are your inheritance. You've committed adultery on every high mountain. There you have worshiped idols, and you have been unfaithful to me. What is that, Gladys? You following Peterson? What does he say? You got to tell us all of it. Start at verse 3 and read to 8.
But you children of witch, come here, sons of a slut, daughters of a whore.
Good God.
Yeah. What business do you have taunting, sneering, and sticking out your tongue? Do you have any idea what wenches you've turned out to be? A race of rebels, a generation of liars. You satisfied your lust any place you find some shade, and fornicate at whim. You kill your children at any convenient spot. Any cave or crevice will do. You take stones from the creek and set up for your sex and religion shrines. You've chosen your fate. Your worship will be your doom. You've climbed a high mountain to practice your foul sex and death religion. behind closed doors.
Yeah, in many instances, it was not a metaphor, their behavior. In many instances, they're real stories of real sexual immorality, real behavior with prostitutes that they were engaged in, because in some instances, the sex was a part of the worship, and God has found all of this behavior so vile, so objectionable, that he tells them about themselves. And Gladys is such a prude. Gladys doesn't even want to read that stuff. Gladys said, I don't want to say this. But because I asked her to read it, she read it. That's the only reason those words came out loud from Gladys' mouth. She knows. She knows. Am I right, Gladys?
Yes, sir.
Gladys said, what? She sat there and got nervous reading that. Yeah. And you put pagan symbols on your doorposts and behind your doors. You've left me and climbed into bed with these detestable gods. He again, that's more symbolic language in that instance. But you have committed yourselves to them. You love to look at their naked bodies. Now that's where he moves back and forth between the real and the metaphor. You've given olive oil to Molech. With many gifts of perfume, you've traveled far, even into the world of the dead, to find new gods to love. You grew weary in your search, but you never gave up. Desire gave you renewed strength, and you did not grow weary. You kept on searching till you found what you wanted. It was not easy for them to descend so deeply into this behavior. It was not easy, and all sinful behavior creeps. It finds its way a little bit at a time. You get a little bit out there, and you get away. You get a little bit further out there, and nobody see that. And you get away, and you get a little farther out there, and before you know it, you're all the way out there. Yes, ma'am. Use your microphone, please.
When I'm hearing scriptures, I'm wondering, well, even now, when you said about the question about being hypocritical, these things that are being described, they are being done, they're honoring God, and yet it's like after 6 o'clock, all of a sudden, I mean, it's just like today, you know, in our time, go to church, you know, you look like you believe and trust in God, and you go through all the rituals and this and that, and you go to church, and you know, but after you go to church, say it's on Sunday, then later on that evening, you're doing these other things.
Yeah.
So is that not hypocritical worship? I mean, God,
I think it is. That's
Yeah.
which is the point for beginning with that question. When is worship hypocritical? And clearly, one of these gods they don't really love,
right.
and they're professing faith to both of them.
You can't serve two masters. It's the thing.
So this God, our God, he says, well, you wanna try your hand with that God? Go ahead. And when you get into trouble, call him and see if he shows up. But yeah, it's like it's like someone has talked about speaking in tongues in the morning, and won't speak to each other in the afternoon. It's like falling all out on the floor and carrying on in here on a Sunday morning, and then on the way out, on the way home, getting in a fight. There's something hypocritical about a professing faith that is not a performing faith. You ought to expect that after someone has gone through the responsible church litany and gone through the church covenant and all of that, going through the articles of faith and say, we believe all this is true, and this is what we're going to do. And then when they leave, they don't do any of that. My favorite one now is to give cheerfully and regularly to the support of the church, because we got a lot of people who give regularly, and many of them give cheerfully, but they just give sparingly, as though it didn't cost anything to do this. But it's a clue for me about who takes seriously their service and who does not, who's tipping and who's tithing. See, we got a lot of people give God a tip, but just a few give a tithe. He rewrote that Bible, the Malachi, bring you all the tips in the storehouse. Yeah. Didn't get tired of looking for trouble to get into. When you got weary, you thought about the trouble you were going to get into, and you found new strength to look a little harder and to get into some more trouble. Desire gave you a renewed strength, and you did not grow weary. And verse 11 says, are you afraid of these idols? Do they terrify you? Is that why you've lied to me and forgotten me and my words? Is it because of my long silence that you no longer fear me? I think it is. Don't you? It's because we would rather take our chances with God as though he could not see than take our chances with the likelihood that we're going to miss out on something that we'd like to have, or miss an opportunity to do something that we'd like to do, or have to go without something that we really want. And so rather than make a decision to remain committed and to keep the words that the vows and covenants that we made, we said, well, it's God. You remember that story about the man who said when he found some money and was told he needed to give some of it to God, so he threw it up in the air and said, okay, God, take what you want. Says God didn't take anything. He picked it back up and put it back in his pocket. Yeah, you get yours. Yes, ma'am, you were going to say something. Am I wrong? Okay, that was just we call that a Marine Corps salute. I'm sorry, sailor. Mm-hmm. No, they're not afraid of God. He said, now I will, in verse 12, now I will expose your so-called good deeds. None of them will help you. Let's see if your idols can save you when you cry to them for help. A puff of wind can knock them down. If you just breathe on them, they fall over. But whoever trusts in me will inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. So after all of this language about hypocrisy, about worship of false idols, he ends with the right answer. If you want to avoid all that you want to avoid, trust in me, says the Lord, and you'll possess the land, and you'll inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. What I miss, Reverend?
Didn't. I was looking at why that verse, is it not because I have been silent, that you do not fear me? And that, which verse is that? 11, part of 11. Is it not because I have long been silent that you do not fear me? And many times, and I was thinking about, when is your worship hypocritical? The backwards and forwards that we can find ourselves there if we look close enough. And if we want to be truthful, because when we're experiencing and everything's good in our life, and the sun is shining, nobody's ruffling your feathers. We just bless the Lord and we praise Him, and God is so good. But when trouble comes, real trouble, and He hasn't come and answered us, He hasn't come to look after us. Then it's a whole different.
Whom do you go first to when trouble comes? Go to family, you go to a friend, you go to somebody you know, you go to a lawyer, you go to the police, you go to everybody else. And ultimately, for many of us, it occurs to us that we might just try God. But if God is your last option and not your first option, then you might have some idols in your life. You might idolize your friend or your lawyer or somebody else. And you have to ask yourself the question about your own worship. Is it hypocritical? You know they don't know what you talk about, don't you? They can't hear a word you say. The people, I'm talking about the people in the back of the room. They can't hear you. Yeah, but you gotta at least talk louder, or y'all sit closer together so you can hear one another. I can hear you fine, but they can't hear you.
Okay, but since you heard me fine, can you relate to them what I was saying to you? Because I'll mess it up again.
No, you won't.
But that's what I'm saying. If you, one person with two souls, you're going to say souls because one is righteous, and the other side, he turned evil. And it's like, how did that come about? I mean, how did you go from good to bad like that if there's nobody else around to lead you there?
Well, there is somebody else around to lead you there, and he's always around to lead you there. Well, yeah, and we're not always aware of the our urges and appetites have purpose. The reason we have sexual urges is so that we can make babies. The reason we get hungry is so that we can feed our physical bodies and maintain our strength. The reason we become thirsty is because we need water to drink, because water is essential to our existence. Our appetites, that's where the fearfully and wonderfully made thing comes in. But we have these appetites with purpose. And so God trusts us to manage our appetites. Trusts us to manage our temptations, to resist temptations that put us in a place where God looks over your shoulder and say, you know, I see you, right? You know I know what you're doing, right? You know I'm looking at you. And so we have this nature, and the tendency is to choose the self over the other. This self over God, the holy other. We get a choice, and we do it. The only thing we do more than choices is heartbeats in the course of a day. We get a choice with just about everything. There's always an offer on the table. And the question is, are you going to accept it or reject it? Often, the answer is, if it's good to me, then I've decided that it's good for me, and I'm getting it. So it's the struggle. Wherever good is found, evil is always present. Yes, ma'am.
Pastor,
One of you ma'ams.
I was thinking too, because we're trying to satisfy this flesh, that's why to us it's taking God too long.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
right.
we impatient, we the microwave folks. We want a quick, fast, and in a hurry. And when it said, because he has held his peace, it's not that he hasn't heard our request or
Right.
knows our situation. But a lot of times we're in a test to see what choice are we going to make. Because, you know, he said he's made a way of escape for every temptation that comes upon us. But we got a choice, and he's not going to take that from us.
I want it all, and I want it now. Now, you were going to say something.
When your worship is hypocritical, kind of intrigues me because it's not hypocritical, and we find ourselves there because if we are saying the same thing, how good God is when we are in the hot fire, as we do when we're not in it. That's when it's not hypocritical. It's hypocritical when we're going through, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how these ends going to meet. But then as soon as God deliver, God is so good, God, I knew you were going to bless me. That's the flip-flop.
I see.
It's hypocritical because people looking at me, and I'm saying, God, you're so faithful, and I knew you would, but they remember how I was acting yesterday when I was, you know.
When I didn't know what I was going to do.
Exactly. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how the ends was going to meet. They saw me. They heard me. They saw me beating every bush, seeing what would fall out. And now that God delivered, I'm just blessing him. And God, you're so faithful. I knew you were going to do it. And that's hypocritical.
Yeah, it's the struggle between faith and doubt. I have faith, but I have doubts. And so I ask God to help my unbelief. Help me to deal with my doubts, strengthen my faith. And it remains imperfect as long as we're here. Now we see through the glass darkly. So perfection won't come in this life. But that does not mean that we should not strive for perfection. We are regularly challenged to put our faith to the test. I think it was Jeanette said, our faith on trial. If you fast in the morning and fight in the afternoon, you're faking. You're not really mature the way you perhaps desire to be.
All the time.
Say that again.
In other words, what you're saying, you have to keep that faith at all times.
Well,
Of the fact that you are doing that, because a lot of times it might slip past a person for a minute that they are doing that.
Yeah.
But once they become conscious of it, then
yeah. You've heard me say before, salvation is like a still image. I mean, you're saved in the moment that when you accept Christ as Savior and Lord, that's salvation comes to you. But sanctification is a process. One is a snapshot, and one is a motion picture. And so every scene is just not the same. And in one scene, you might get to play the part of the windshield, but in the next scene, you get to play the part of the bug. So it's just not whose life is like this. It goes constantly up. No, life is a series of ups and downs, and every day we are striving to be better. But it's real. Where good is found, evil is always present. I think things that I wish I didn't think. And I slap myself and say, snap out of it. But before I slap myself and say, snap out of it, I enjoy being in my thoughts. I'm probably the only one with this problem. See, ain't nobody else said nothing but you. Yeah. That's the nature of it. Another way of describing this, I've said to you before that when Adam and Eve, when the project was over, God breathed into Adam's nostrils and the man became a living soul. There was no sin in the world. The Bible says he took the man and he said, I don't want him to be by himself. I'm going to make him some company. And so he put the man to sleep and he made a woman. And he came out and the man said, whoa, man. So we've been calling y'all women ever since. The man was so glad to see what God had made for him. And but they lived in blissful perfection. They didn't have problems. They didn't have to work hard. The plan was apparently that childbirth would even be easy. But then temptation came. And Eve believed the snake when he told her if she ate, she would become who she already was. If you eat of this, you won't really die. You'll become like God. She didn't know that she was made in the image and likeness of God. He told her she would become who she already was. And she believed it. And so do we. We are born with a certain integrity. And there's one who is determined to disintegrate our oneness, our sense of integrity, to blow up what God has made one. God made us whole. And our own um, temptations tend to pull us apart. So what we try to do is keep on trying to get ourselves together. In the meantime, we behave like hypocrites, at least from time to time. Yes, ma'am.
You said there was no sin.
Right.
Is that saying that Satan hadn't made a scene yet? He hadn't realized all of this before he got to Eve? Is that why it was no sin then, but when
Well,
he approached, that's when the world became sinful?
Yes, that's the original sin. The man and the woman in the garden decided to disobey God. And that decision was the introduction of sin into the world. Well, I mean, before that, who was going to sin? Huh? Yeah, right. Yeah, so yeah, that's the original sin. As a matter of fact, that's what it's called, the doctrine of original sin. Let's see what I can do. Huh? I know. I'm looking at that and looking at the clock. I thought we would. I thought we would go farther than that. We did, but I talk so much. Yeah, y'all tricked me like you did 2 weeks ago. Made me stay at 8:15. Ed Brown got up and left. I said, well, wonder why he left. I guess I wasn't saying nothing. And I looked at the clock, it's 8:13. I said, well, no wonder he left, a time ago. Yeah. I'm not going to start this 14th verse because if I do, I'll mess up something I don't want to mess up and fail to include something I want to include. So next week, Emerald will resume at verse 14, if that's all right with you. Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see. 2 days ago, was it, Gladys, when Kisa became a grandmother for the 3rd time? Was it 2 days ago? Yeah, Kisa White. So we keep Kisa and Shaky. That's one day I'm gonna learn how to say Shaky's real name for real. It's Shapria, something like that. Meantime, y'all know Shaky? Yeah. Yeah. So she had another son. So she's got 3 boys now. Say it again, Judy. Just say it out loud. We are still streaming. Thank you. I want to say good night to our virtual classmates and invite you to join us again next Wednesday at 7 when we'll resume our conversation in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 14. Thank you. God bless you. Good night. All right. Am I off, Lorna?